Good evening, everybody. Welcome to part two of our Daniel class. My name is Josh. I'm guiding us on our path to understanding Daniel all the more deeply. And we had a lesson one last week at the church building, but this week I'm here at my house recording. This isn't live, it's a recording that we're posting, but I'm happy for you guys to have tuned in. And since it's a recording, I'd encourage you to go back if you haven't and watch Daniel part one so that you can have a better feel of all that we're covering and that's relevant for coming into this part in particular. But I'll give a brief reminder of what was going on there. So, part one, we covered an introduction to the book of Daniel, kind of looked at some basics that led into the book itself and what's unique about it, what's cool and awesome, which this is my favorite book as of now, at least in the Bible. I don't know if we're allowed to have favorites, but if we are, then it's mine. And we covered some geography that's pretty relevant to the kingdom of Israel as a whole and the history as it came into, in part because of that geography, the life of Daniel. And so there's history for us now that was prophecy as Daniel was writing it down and seeing these visions that we will cover actually starting next week. But we really covered the history leading up to and including encompassing the scope of Daniel in his actual life. And so we saw as we looked, the main idea of the book is God rules the nations, do not fear. Okay? So we saw in Daniel chapter 1 how this was definitely true as Daniel stood a test of his faith and he and his friends chose to do what God called them to do rather than effectively be assimilated into the lifestyle of the Babylonians. But we have further to see how this is truly the important part of the entire book of Daniel. I think we will see that even more so today than last week. And so, before we continue, I do want to mention Katie is feeling a lot better. She's improving every day now, and so hopefully she'll be all the better by a couple days from now. But we're really grateful for all you guys encouraging us and taking care of us. We really do feel taken care of by our church family here in Northwest Arkansas. So love you guys. Thank you for everybody who's helped take care of us and make sure we're okay. And we're doing good. We're improving, and she's just getting a lot of rest because that's what she needs. So here we go. Part two. The title is Righteous Man in an Unbelieving World. We saw a taste of this in Daniel chapter 1 as he and his friends were up against what it was to be assimilated into this unbelieving world structure. But this is really the coverage of Daniel's chapter 3 through 6. And it's really intriguing to, as we'll dive into these, to consider his life as he's unique amongst pretty much the whole Bible as somebody who ministered as a Jew predominantly to Gentiles. Certainly unique in the Old Testament. Of course, we have Paul doing that in the New Testament a lot, and there's some other characters in the Old Testament that do it too, but none quite as focused as perhaps Daniel was, and you see that as you read. But Daniel chapters 1 through 6 are really historical, kind of narrative in structure. Whereas chapters 7 through 12, the second half of the book, are visions that Daniel received that are apocalyptic. And so they're not necessarily meant to be read as literal happenings, while Daniel chapter 1 through 6 are a lot more literal. But interestingly, there's also this kind of delineation. Daniel chapter 1 almost feels like an introduction to the book. And then Daniel 2 through 7 is really unique as its own structure. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But to begin, I want us to really consider stories as a whole. Humanity has been telling stories for as long as humanity has been. I think we are storytelling creatures. We really love and thrive on stories. And you can think in various capacities of your life how stories are really important and crucial to you. And there are times and places for those stories and different capacities. You like them or don't like them, or this kind of story, or this type, this genre, whatever it might be. But I think as we all have our preferences, we still all really love stories, and that's one of the really powerful aspects of God's Word. Is so much of this is narrative. So it tells these stories, and we see in this section all these stories as they are told. And what's interesting is the way you tell a story really bleeds into the way you interpret a story and what is important and relevant for that story in particular. Okay, so for example, this is by and large how most of the modern storytelling is structured around, right? If it's a good narrative, a good story, right, you have an inciting incident up here, something that sets the hero or heroes on their journey, and of course you cover exposition as you're moving up the graph here. Rising action, the tension is building and building until it gets to this climax, where there's this epic, awesome thing that's happening, and either it goes really well, and then the falling action and denouement are like the resolution of those things, and it feels good, or it goes really bad, and the falling action and denouement kind of settle into perhaps in a way a new inciting incident. Right, there are so many different stories you could pick. The one that comes to mind for me right in this moment is the Lord of the Rings. I love the way it's structured, but it's really like this, right? You have everything chill and good in the Shire, and then you have Gandalf notice that Bilbo uses this ring, and then he kind of, this inciting incident is like, uh-oh, this ring is a big deal and something we got to make sure we really deal with. And so they start their journey through the Fellowship of the Ring. You could consider this basic plot as the just that one movie, or over the course of the entire trilogy of the Lord of the Rings. But really, it builds in this kind of way. There's more complexity to it, but this is the general structure of how we tell and interpret stories. And so we could apply this same storytelling idea as we read Scripture. And in fact, I think we do, whether we really realize it or not. We kind of expect this kind of a structure for things to build up to the climax, which is kind of this like moment where perhaps the hero is tested in the ultimate way, or that they go through something that's just insurmountable, perhaps, and that's the climax of the story, right? Think about David facing off with Goliath. There's the inciting incident of the Goliath and his people, the Philistines, coming up against Israel. Exposition about why that's relevant. The rising action as he continues to berate Israel and their God, and then the climax as our hero David slays Goliath. And so we really think of that moment as the climax. The Bible actually uses a pretty different structure for how to tell stories. And that's not to say this structure is wrong, because we can still find value in it. And I think maybe the Bible had this story structure in mind often, because this one is still effective and great, but it's not the only one. And so, interestingly, this word, chiasm, is the story structure that the Bible very often uses. Hopefully I haven't lost you yet. Hang in there, because I'm going to explain very basically what a chiasm is. So, the reason I have a mirror here, and I have chiasm on both sides, see, I'm getting used to this, but you see what I'm talking about, is that a chiasm kind of tells a story like a mirror. And so rather than having a plot line that's like this, and the climax is near the end, or often like very, very near the end, the climax of the chiasm itself is the center. And so you have all this rising action and such that leads to the very middle point of the story, and then the entirety of the second half of the story, including what we would perhaps consider to be the climax, is often kind of a retelling, in a way, of the elements from the first part of the story. So you have either mirrored elements, completely mirrored, or just mirrored thematically. And so it still makes sense as a story as a whole, but its design is kind of to draw you in and guide you to the center. Not towards the end where we would typically put the climax, but to the very middle point of our story. And so its design is almost like a mountain, like you can ascend the mountain from one side. You come up to the peak, which is the kind of defining moment for the story itself and for the purpose of the story, right? I do not climb a mountain for the scenery halfway back down the mountain after I've already climbed it, right? I climb the mountain for the scenery from the peak, and not just the scenery, but also the accomplishment and all the beauty that the journey took me to get up there. Does that make sense? Perhaps also when I would tell the story of climbing the mountain, the peak is certainly the climax of the story. And if we're telling the story with our plot structure, the peak is happening almost at the very end, and then it's like, and then I went down the mountain, right? And then I went back to my car or whatever it might be. And so this is kind of how the chiasm is designed to be, that instead of skipping over that last part, it's kind of a mirror, more of the same, of the first half of the story that they kind of match as they're going down the mountain. Another reason that the Bible uses chiasms in particular is it is a beautiful image of the temple itself. That there's something about the design of a chiasm that's made that wherever you're at in the story, it's almost like you can kind of peek and see inner from where you're at and want to go there. And then as you make that journey a little bit deeper, you can peek a little bit deeper and desire and want to be even further in, right? And God's temple is exactly like that. It's designed that wherever you're at, if you're in the temple courts, you can kind of sneak some peeks in to one layer deeper into the temple. And then if you're in there, if you're one of the priests, you have this kind of yearning to see what is in the Holy of Holies, God's very presence, right? And so we're drawn deeply to want to be in the center. And so a chiasm is designed to tell a story in the very same way that it invites us to come deeper into the center to see what the point of the story really is, right? The point of the mountaintop is to perhaps accomplish, achieve, right, and to observe, to see. The point of the temple is to experience God a little bit deeper than we ever have, right? And of course, the Holy of Holies is like incredibly exclusive, right? The only back in the Old Testament times, one person, the high priest, could enter the Holy of Holies one day a year, right? And so the whole rest of the time, wherever you're at, you're kind of looking inward into the temple and wishing and yearning that you can be even deeper. And that's why the Bible loves to use this chiasm structure. We see the chiasm structure in the book of Noah, or it's not a book, the story of Noah in Genesis. We see Jesus utilize it in the Sermon on the Mount in a really smart way. The sermons to the seven churches in Revelation, and so in Revelation 2 through 3, we see Jesus kind of talking to these seven churches. It's designed as a chiasm as well. And I believe I talked about that when I preached on several of those not too long ago. But just a little bit more in-depth look at this structure because it's very relevant for this section of what we're talking about here. So Daniel 2 through 7, right, we talked about at our last lesson, is originally, at least believed by scholars, to have been written in Aramaic. It comprises a majority of the Aramaic we see in the entirety of the Old Testament. And so even though 1 through 6 are these accounts that are historical, 7 kind of hops in as this Aramaic section starting in chapter 2, which is why chapter 1 is often viewed as this like introduction because it really gets going 2 through 7. It's more than just this language that it has in common. It's designed as, you guessed it, a chiasm. And so Daniel chapter 2 through Daniel chapter 7, each chapter is kind of designed to be a section building up to the center. And so Daniel chapter 2, if we look, is focused on a dream of 4 kingdoms replaced by a 5th. This is Nebuchadnezzar having a dream of the statue, right? And so the bulk of the chapter is actually kind of about this dream that he really desires to have interpreted, and then Daniel interprets it. Awesome story, right? And it's kind of historical because it really happened, but it also is focused weirdly on this apocalyptic unveiling of the future. We're actually going to cover chapter 2 and 7 next time, so we're going to focus on one layer in from there. Chapter 3 is God's people challenge of faith, right? They have a challenge as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego perhaps are going to be thrown into the fiery furnace unless they bow to this idol. And then one layer deeper, we have chapter 4. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, of course, is warned of his pride. And so he has this dream of a tree that gets felled in his dream, and he desires it to be interpreted. He talks to Daniel. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Daniel interprets it for him, of course. And then chapter 5, we have a king warned of his pride again, though it's not King Nebuchadnezzar. It's his grandson, and we'll talk about that. Belshazzar is his name. But this is the story of the hand writing on the wall. And then you can pretty clearly see how it matches with chapter 4, but we'll dive into that down the line here. Chapter 6, we have a mirror of chapter 3. God's people have a challenge of faith again. This time it's Daniel, as he is potentially going to be thrown in the lion's den unless he prays only to the king, which it's even a different king in this story, the king of the Median Empire. And then there at chapter 7, we see another vision, a vision rather than a dream of 4 world kingdoms replaced by a 5th, right? So instead of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue, Daniel's having a dream, I believe this may be in the time of Belshazzar, of 4 beasts. And so it pretty clearly is a combination that paints this beautiful picture of a mirror, a chiasm, a mountain, the temple itself, inviting us inward. And this is why we ask the question, right, this is why all of this matters, is for this very notion. What is in the center, right? What is the point that this section of Daniel, why would he bother to design it as a chiasm, but to invite us in to the center? And as we uncover, getting deeper and deeper, closer and closer to the center of the temple, of this chiasm itself, we see God unveiling the reality of why he wanted to talk about this, why this story is being told at all, right? And so, like I said, we're going to talk about the ends next week. It'll be incredibly relevant for the rest of the book of Daniel, but for this section, I think this is enough for us to understand. Okay, so Daniel chapter 3 and 6. So we'll work our way up the mountain, but we'll see two different sides as we're on our way up here. So here's the structure of Daniel chapter 3. It is not only a part of a grander chiasm with chapters 2 through 7 altogether, it itself is a chiasm. And so within the chapter we see this same structure that's kind of a very famous thing for the chiasms in Scripture to do, that they're like chiasms within chiasms, which is really confusing if you don't really know what to look for. But I wanted to guide us through. And so we begin the story of Daniel 3 with our heroes thriving. Now, technically, this section starts at the very end of chapter 2. But when this book was written in Aramaic, the section, they actually started chapter 3 with the final verse of chapter 2, which just talks about Daniel's pals, right, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, being elevated to a high status. And so the heroes are thriving in our first beat of the story. And then as we go a little higher or deeper, we see Nebuchadnezzar give this edict, right? That he builds this massive, or has built, this massive idol that he expects everybody, when they hear the sound of all of this music, to bow down to, right? And so as the king offers this edict, there's a punishment, right, a flex of his personal power as king of this nation. And the idea is that they need to bow to this idol or else, right? And for them, the or else is to be thrown into a burning furnace, a fiery furnace, right? Now, this idol itself is massive, 90 feet by 9 feet, so it's huge, and the scriptures doesn't really explain kind of what it was. Perhaps that means it's really tall or really long, I don't know, but either way, it is an idol that our heroes refuse to bow down to. Okay, so there's as our action begins to rise, we have plotting against the heroes themselves. It speaks of these magi, these different advisors and people that had a jealousy of our heroes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they prepare to tattle on them. Okay, and so they're in preparation to, expect, and they're kind of driving this idea of our heroes failing in what Nebuchadnezzar has given as his edict. And then we have a decision point. As we're nearing the top of our mountain, right, they are given this decision to bow or not to bow, right? Will they bow to the idol, or will they stay faithful to God? And we see them succeed in this decision. The Israelites come through. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do great. By the way, it doesn't talk about Daniel at all in this entire chapter. And I don't know where he was for this. I have to imagine he did not bow. So perhaps he was elsewhere on some assignment amidst the entirety of Babylon or Babylonia. And so somewhere else doing something advisory perhaps, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stay faithful, and they refuse to bow. So then we reach the center of the story, where the king, Nebuchadnezzar, punishes these people, right? He is angry with them and wishes to dole out a punishment to them. And so he really, brings them in and is about to throw them into the furnace, but gives them one last chance as we head back down the mountain, that they are given a decision to bow and to change their mind. But our heroes stay faithful. They double down on the decision they've already made. with some incredible lines, right? Our God can save us, but even if he does not, we will not bow down to you. That line gives me chills. I love this moment for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and it makes me wonder, do I have that same faith? That if I make this kind of decision and I see the anger of this, powerful authority figure, and he gives me one last chance, would I stay faithful? And so we can put ourselves in our hero's shoes to consider if we would do the same. So he goes through with his punishment because they doubled down on their decision. And as we have our falling action here, the plot against the heroes was unequivocally thwarted, right? And so the plot is thwarted. God delivers his heroes even as they are put to the test, and even though they didn't know if God would save them, though they knew he could, right? Which was enough for them. And so God delivers them. Interestingly, in this story, there's a fourth person with them in the fiery furnace. This is not really what we're going to focus on for today, but there's speculation if this is an angel or perhaps it is Christ himself, because he is in human form and is said to by Nebuchadnezzar to be like a son of the gods. Perhaps it's just an angel. Perhaps it is Christ. Who knows? But I'm sure Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do. All the same, he delivers them. They come through the fiery furnace, not even smelling like they had been on fire. The people who threw them into the furnace were burned up just being close enough to it, because as they doubled down on their decision, the angry King Nebuchadnezzar amped up the flames, right, the temperature of the flames, and so only their what was binding them was burned. Their clothes were all fine, not singed in the slightest, right? Pretty incredible moment. And of course, as we continue down our mountain, we have a new edict by the king, but this time it is not one to point towards a false idol. It is one to recognize the power of our incredible God. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful story that concludes where it started, with the heroes thriving, but even more so, right? And so in the wake of this miracle, as Nebuchadnezzar witnessed it himself, he bestows upon them even greater status than they had at the beginning, which is pretty incredible, right, for the story. And so this beautiful structure is an awesome chiasm, right, a mirror, as you can see the matching points there, of the heroes thriving, matching together, as the king offering an edict, matching the plotting of the world against the plots being thwarted by God's will, and then the decision points as they're offered, and then a king as he punishes, which is where we find our true center of the story, right? The whole design of the chiasm is to beckon us to what's the point, what are we supposed to get out of this story? And there's, of course, plenty of awesome lessons that we can get that aren't the main lesson of any story in the scriptures, right? This is undoubtedly a story about faith, right? Of what it is to stand for what is right and what is good. And yet the center of this story is the angry King Nebuchadnezzar, right? These few lines in verse 14 through 16 where he is angry and irate at their disobedience of his authority. And he says this line in verse 15, which is, as far as I can tell, the true center of this chiasm. He says, then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Right? And so we have two kind of ideas that are coming together, right? This question is the point of the story. What God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Well, the God of Israel, of course, right? Yahweh himself can save them, right? As they themselves respond. And yet the question is the center of the story. Yeah, as Israel struggled with what it was to really have faith, as we so easily struggle in our difficult moments, as we are put to the test just as our heroes are in this story, this very question in some form comes onto our minds and onto our hearts, right? What God can save me from this experience, from this moment, from this feeling, from this grief, from whatever it might be that I'm dealing with? Well, what God is able to rescue you from the hand of any difficulty, any authority, any power, the answer is Yahweh and Him alone, right? It's not us. It's not by our own wisdom. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go against the wisdom that the world would have. And these are supposed to be these brilliant, wise advisors, and they turn out to be proven just that, not because they were smarter, but because they put their trust in the God who could and did save them. Importantly, of course, as has been pointed out many times by many sources, but I feel obligated to point it out, God did not stop them from going through the furnace, but He kept them safe even as they were amidst the flames. And the same is true for us, that God won't always keep us from going in the thick of the flames and the difficulty, but He will deliver us, just as we see in this story. So, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand, from any hand? Yahweh. Amen? And so it is, of course, a story of faith, but the main character is not really Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's perhaps closer to Nebuchadnezzar, but truly the main character is God. And so we look at the reflection of Daniel chapter 6, and surprise, surprise, it is as well a chiasm, but perhaps more surprising, it is the exact same chiasm. I did not just accidentally duplicate the slide and change the number. The story beats are exactly identical. So, as we dive in, let's consider this story in chapter 6. We have our hero, rather than heroes. It's really focused on Daniel, but it's meant that we can put ourselves in his shoes, right? And so Daniel is thriving. This is immediately after the kingdom, which we will go through in a moment, of Babylon was overthrown, right? So Daniel had been elevated to one of the highest positions, third highest in the entirety of the kingdom, and that would have put him in severe danger as the Persian Mede joint empire was sweeping through and took over Babylon. And yet, we see that he is still incredibly respected and placed above, like, pretty much the whole area, right? We have one king of the Median Empire who is stationed here in Babylon, and we see that he chooses just a couple guys underneath him to kind of manage everything, and Daniel is one of those guys, right? And so despite all the odds of how chapter 5 ends, which we'll talk about momentarily, Daniel is still thriving. He's doing awesome, right? But then we have yet again a king's edict with a punishment inherent. That's a personal flex of the power of the king themselves, right? And the idea here is bow to another false idol, though this time it's effectively the king, or else we will throw you amidst the lions, right? This is perhaps Daniel, his most well-known story that he's actually involved in, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is right up there as well. But this story, right, he is not allowed to pray to anyone else. This is kind of what the edict says. And if he does, he'll be thrown into the lion's den. And this, just as the furnace, is certain death, right? These lions were not tameable or friendly, right? They were dangerous and hungry, as we see towards the end of the story. And yet, as our action rises, it's not just this looming potential threat. These magi are jealous and prepare to discover our hero and tattle on him, exactly like we saw in the first story in chapter 3, right? And so he is put to a decision point. Daniel is, just as his friends were in our last story, even though it was separated by a great number of years, most likely, right? To bow or not to bow. In a way, the pressure here is to bow to King Darius, but in a way, the idea is he's commanded, do not bow to God. And so Daniel, instead of the choice from last time to not bow to the idol, his choice is he will bow to God in prayer. And so, as was his custom, he prays, facing Jerusalem, yearning to return God's people to where God had them for their promised land, right? And knowing that would, in fact, take place sooner or later, that's the direction he prays to, even with this edict telling him not to pray, right? And so we see this time not an angry king, but a saddened king, a reluctant king who's going to punish Daniel, even though he doesn't really want to, right? And so the center of the story, which we'll come back to, is this reluctant king that's kind of pushed to punish Daniel, even though he loves Daniel and doesn't want him to be punished. And so, interestingly, the decision double down doesn't happen with Daniel this time, as it did with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The reluctant king kind of has this own double down on his own decision, that he tries to find any way around the edict but cannot. And he offers this kind of idea as we're kind of on our way down the mountain, that he hopes that Daniel's God will somehow protect him. Though it feels more like a death sentence that's like, well, good luck, or something like that. But lo and behold, the plotting is thwarted. God delivers, just as he did with the fiery furnace. And we see Daniel spend all night in the lion's den, only to come out completely unscathed. And what does he say? That God sent an angel to close the mouths of these lions. So we see the pattern, right? This is exactly the same story structure, but different exact events fit the structure in a slightly, barely different way. But this is pretty much the same story, right? And of course, those who were plotting ended up being thrown into the lion's den, and they do not even hit the floor, the ground, before they are torn apart. And so the hero, of course, is thriving even more at the end of the story. He's elevated, if you can imagine it, even more so than he ever was. I skipped one of the important parts here, right? In our B2, the king offers an edict of the incredible power that God really has. Exactly as Nebuchadnezzar had a whole regime beforehand, we see Darius the First follow in the same footsteps. Right? And so what do we have here? The same story, like a mirror in its reuse of the same structure, but all these years later, and on the other side of this beautiful large chiasm. But this chiasm in particular has a center point, and it's this king choosing to punish, but this time reluctantly so. And the true center happens in verse 15, where they say something to the effect to remind that the king's edict is unalterable. That when the king gives an edict, it cannot be changed, right? And so When we had our last story, the idea was that God can deliver. But when we have this story, if we remember God as the main character as well, even though they are speaking about their king, that his word must stay true. What does this say about God? That our faith in him is sure because his word is dependable. Because as God speaks, it remains and will always be true and certain. Right? This is the point of this story, even though it's almost not a part of the story. The idea is not really focused on Daniel and not really focused on the those who are plotting and even on the king himself, but that God's edicts are unalterable. Right? This is powerful as we unveil the truth of this story and why Daniel and his friends are willing to go up against the insurmountable odds of these incredible powers, right? Darius is a king amongst the most powerful empire on the planet in the moment, right? And just as before, Nebuchadnezzar was king, a different empire, but at the time met the same qualifications, that it was the world power at the time. And yet they were willing to go against that king's edict because they have a greater king, right? One whose word will always be true and will never be changed or shaken. That is what this story is ultimately about. But we see the beauty of the chiasm structure, unveiling truth that brings us deeper into seeing who God really is. Even in the story where we hardly see God, we of course see God coming through in a lot of ways, but perhaps not quite in the same way we would expect as we look at the very center of chapter 6. So, we're going to go even deeper inward in this large chiasm and consider Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 5, which are matching chiasms, but you guessed it, they are also chiasms themselves, with the way that the stories are each structured. We'll see how well they match, right? And so these stories are both centered on this idea, the price of a man's pride. And so we begin chapter 4. The king is at the palace and living in his pride. This king in chapter 4 is back to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And the verse 1 says, at least in the version I read, that he was content and prosperous. This, by the way, very interesting chapter, because this chapter was written by Nebuchadnezzar. And in fact, the version of this that was thought to be originally written in Aramaic includes the very end of chapter 3 in part, where he's like gassing up God after the story is pretty much concluded. We see him kind of singing the praises of God, and it leads directly into this story. And so Nebuchadnezzar was speaking at the end of chapter 3 and coming right into him writing here. So was it meant to be in chapter 3 or chapter 4? Doesn't really matter, as we're really thinking about this all as one cohesive book of Daniel. But where you put the line doesn't change much about our chiastic structure here. The king is at his palace and living in pride, content, prosperous, looking at all that he has built. And yet he has these dreams, right? Part B here. God gives a warning that requires interpretation, and through this story, that warning is through Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So he receives this dream of this grand tree that's offering all this shade, and then an angel or character of some kind appears and says, "Oh, time to cut this tree down." And so, this dream troubles our king Nebuchadnezzar greatly, and so he goes to his advisors in need of an interpretation. But the next story beat, they don't know how to interpret this dream. which happens in a different way in chapter 2, but we'll cover that next week. And so Daniel isn't around for this section, and no interpretation can be found, period. Daniel is kind of at our center moment here because the interpretation is nowhere to be seen, but then our king Nebuchadnezzar remembers Daniel. This is the center moment here in the story. He remembers Daniel, and then we see the decline of the action. C2, that Daniel interprets the dream and delivers this warning, which of course he kind of felt instinctually was a warning through the dream, but Daniel brings that to fruition and explains that this is a warning of his pride. And so if he continues in his pride and does not give God the glory and the credit, then he will be cut down, is really the warning that is offered by Daniel. And so, interestingly, we have a time skip. Don't always get those in the Bible. That's clarified. A full year goes by where he's choosing to fight, to be humble. But then it zooms in on him a year later as he kind of looks around and considers everything he has made and he has accomplished. And then we see part B2, the warning is fulfilled. So he becomes like an animal for all this time, right? That he, as the king, kind of goes insane. He goes crazy, has a mental dissociation with reality, and things change with his body to reflect this like animalistic existence, and he's like eating grass with the cattle for a long time. I think it says 3.5 years, and or 3.5 times, which it's confusing and prophetic a little bit, but we'll cover that later. And and then it has this beautiful statement as Nebuchadnezzar's retelling that he raised his eyes to heaven, and as he raised those eyes up, he understood in his humility where his true life and place lies, and offers this glory up to God. And so A2, we bring that his kingdom is restored in his humility, right? That he chooses inevitably to understand and accept this humility from God, that God is the true king, and so God allows him to have this humility restored. And so the center that we see here is, interestingly, Daniel being remembered, right? That Daniel had interpreted a dream for Nebuchadnezzar before, but really the focus here, Daniel wouldn't have it be on himself. Daniel realized and always spoke to this idea, even though he is the one being physically remembered, that it is God who's the keeper of mysteries and secrets and unveiler of such things. And so it's not him by his wisdom really that is being remembered. It is the power of God that needs to be remembered in this story. Now, if we fast forward to Daniel chapter 5, we see the same thing. I mistyped a little bit of this, but I'll explain what's really going on here as well. So this story matches exactly perfectly. Just the second and third section of B2 are incorrect, but I'll explain. So A1, the king is at his palace in his pride. This time it is his grandson Belshazzar, and he's partying it up with God's stuff. He's having this awesome, by his own metric, party that he thinks, man, I want to get out these gold goblets and really go all out. And so he calls for goblets of gold that once his grandfather had taken from the Jews in the temple, that they once belonged in the temple and belonged to Yahweh, of course. And as he brings those out and they party and defile these objects that were holy, we see a comeuppance in a way, that God is offering a warning that needs interpreting. Hey, buddy. That God needs to get something across to him. And so this disembodied hand, fingers of a hand, write a message on the wall, which is just crazy. And interestingly enough, for history, this warning that needs interpreting, none of the people here can read it. It's these words are written in Persian. And, I already spoke to this a little bit, but what is ensuing with this warning, that even though they can't read it at the time, is that Persia is going to come through and oust them, completely decimating the forces of Babylon in kind of one fell swoop and taking over as the new world power. And so this warning, the writing is on the wall, literally now, that Belshazzar and his kingdom are about to fall. The number of his days is reaching an end, is the heart of the message here. The words in Persian are mene, mene, tekel, parsin, which we will find out in a moment what exactly those translate to. And so, this time in our story, the center is the same. Daniel is remembered. And so, this time, Belshazzar, it makes clear, had forgotten Yahweh and how glorifying he ought to be towards him, clearly by his actions. And Nebuchadnezzar is nowhere to be found. He's passed away by now, by Belshazzar coming into his own. And we have instead Belshazzar's most likely, his mother, who would be Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. And she remembers Daniel, who helped her father all those years ago, and says, oh, wait, Daniel would probably be able to interpret this. And so they send for him, because just as his grandfather all those years ago, with his warning, he kind of instinctually knows that something is terribly wrong when a ghost hand writes something on the wall, especially something you can't read. And so he's desperate to find out what this is. Daniel comes and interprets the warning. Mene translates to number, and so it's number. And as Daniel interprets, he's saying your number is few and few and few, right? This idea of tekel is this idea of measure. You have been weighed and measured and been found wanting, which is not just true in this story. It's also a quote from Katie's favorite movie. So a Knight's Tale reference from my wife. Awesome. One of her favorite movies anyway, as far as I know. And then parsin, which is kind of a play on words because it's incredibly similar to the word Persia or Persian in their language as well as in ours. But it also translates to divided. And so, our hero, Daniel, interprets this to say, your kingdom is about to be divided. You are so prideful, and your comeuppance is coming, and your number is so short, you do not even understand how short it really is, right? And this is after this totally awesome line that he offers as Belshazzar desires to know and have this interpreted. He says, I'll make you the third most powerful person, which we already considered. Nabonidus, who's Belshazzar's father, is the official king, of this empire, and yet he is abroad studying these things because he doesn't really have interest in ruling personally. And so that's why Belshazzar, who's second in command officially as the son of the true king, is kind of the instated present king, right? Which this has been an argument levied against the book of Daniel by many scholars over the years. Like, oh, well, the Bible's got it wrong because they think that this guy was king, but he never was. But that's not really what's going on. He's functionally the king. He's just in the record books would not be attributed as such. And recently, we saw, relatively recently, historically speaking, we uncovered some archaeology that supports exactly what the Bible is claiming, that Belshazzar may not have been true king, but acted as king for these sections of history. And so, the Bible comes up with another dub. Who would have thought anything else? Our hero then, having interpreted this dream, is offered prior to such by the king to be elevated to this position. And Daniel's response, which is so awesome, is, I don't want all that. Give that to somebody else. But I'll go ahead and interpret it for you, right? So he's like, I don't need your stuff. By this point, Daniel is in his 70s at a minimum, and so he's like, I don't need this. You can give that to somebody else. But he doesn't. After he interprets the dream, Belshazzar elevates him in a way to kind of honor him rather than elevating God. And so what happens? His kingdom is taken that night and is lost in his pride. And so historically, we find that this is exactly what history agrees happened. And I have this extra biblical account from Herodotus, right, a Greek historian who kind of produced a record of the overthrow of Babylon that sheds light on this biblical account. This is what it reads. Cyrus, who's the king of Persia, then advanced against Babylon, but the Babylonians, having taken the field, awaited his coming. And when he had advanced near the city, the Babylonians gave battle, and being defeated, were shut up in the city of Babylon. But as they had been long aware of the restless spirit of Cyrus, and saw that he attacked all nations alike, they had laid up provisions for many years, and therefore were under no apprehensions about a siege. So basically, the Babylonians anticipated being attacked, but they were in this like impenetrable fortress of Babylon and stored up all this stuff, so they couldn't possibly be sieged. On the other hand, Cyrus found himself in difficulty, since much time had elapsed and his affairs were not at all advanced. Whether, therefore, someone else made the suggestion to him in his perplexity, or whether he himself devised the plan, he had recourse to the following stratagem. Having stationed the bulk of his army near the passage of the river where it enters Babylon, and again having stationed another division beyond the city where the river makes its exit, he gave order to his forces to enter the city as soon as they should see the stream fordable. Having stationed his forces and given these directions, he himself marched away with the ineffective part of his army. And having come to the lake, Cyrus did the same with respect to the river and the lake as the queen of the Babylonians had done. For having diverted the river by means of a canal into the lake, which was before a swamp, he made the ancient channel fordable by the sinking of the river. When this took place, the Persians, who were appointed to that purpose close to the stream of the river, which had now subsided to about the middle of a man's thigh, entered Babylon by this passage. If, however, the Babylonians had been aware of it beforehand, or had known of what Cyrus was about, they would not have suffered the Persians to enter the city, but would have utterly destroyed them. For having shut all the little gates that lead to the river, and mounting the walls that extend along the banks of the river, they would have caught them as in a net. Whereas the Persians came upon them by surprise. It is related by the people who inhabited the city that by reason of its great extent, when they who were at the extremities were taken, those of the Babylonians who inhabited the center knew nothing of the capture, for it happened to be a festival, which is exactly what our story dictates. But they were dancing at the time and enjoying themselves till they received certain information of the truth, and thus Babylon was taken for the first time. So this impenetrable fortress of Babylon, Herodotus gives us a brief account here. They thought it was completely insurmountable, and so they celebrated, they partied. It was time of festival, and Cyrus sneaks his way in a way that they did not expect as they partied, and they didn't even know until, of course, Persia was already there, having already conquered the city. With, as history dictates by this account and others, they put up no battle whatsoever for the actual taking of the city itself of Babylon, which had never really been taken, right? And this is incredible as it corroborates our account of Daniel 5 that we see in the book of Daniel, that this great, amazing place is toppled without any fight at all, and we got a front row seat at the party where it was going down, because our story dictates that that very night was when Persia had invaded, but they didn't even know it. And so the writing was on the wall, though they never knew until it was already far too late. And if they had known, if they had considered this kind of thing, they could have defended against it. And yet, in his pride, he partied and brought no glory to God whatsoever, even as Daniel offers this interpretation of the truth. But what do we find? Of course, Daniel in the centerpiece being remembered, but ultimately, as Daniel was remembered, it should have been God that was remembered. So we conclude with still wondering a question. What is the centerpiece of all of this chiasm? Right? The very center between chapter 4 and chapter 5. What is happening? What are the words that are the centermost place? As we read these stories, we look at these centers that guide us towards God all the more. What is the center of all the centers? Right? And so in chapter 3 and 6, we see what God can save you, and no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. Right? And of course, the king punishing those for their disobedience, right? Chapters 4 and 5, the one who can truly help is remembered. Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadnezzar's daughter both remembered Daniel separately. And then of chapter 2 and 7, we lead to the final verse of Daniel chapter 4, verse 37. And this is what it reads. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. This is the centerpiece of this entire chiasm. Half of the book of Daniel has this as the centermost portion that it's guiding you towards, so that you can see even a Gentile king can acknowledge this truth about God. Right? That they need as well to praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven. Right? This is the most powerful man on the planet at the time, and he realizes that he needs to offer praise not to himself, but to God, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. Right? God really does know what he's doing and what he's talking about. And those who walk in pride, right, like Nebuchadnezzar himself for a time, he is able to humble. What a story for Israel as they move forward, right? And we'll see why this is particularly relevant for the history of Israel moving on past the Persia-Mede Empire into the future generations. But also, God's people have needed this for so long, and we need it even more so now, right? That we need to know no one is beyond God's reach or jurisdiction, right? Everything he does, we can count on and have faith in. All his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, whether it's you and me, or anyone else, he is able to humble. And that's where we see the conclusion of our part 2, right? That all of this chiasm leads into this centerpiece, seeing the truth that we've continued to see, right? That God rules the nations, do not fear. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat or write them down and ask them as we meet next week. We should be back in person, barring any more future problems or anything that is unforeseen. But can't wait to be with you guys next week. Excited to get to continue to dive into this beautiful, incredible work that is the book of Daniel. Thank you.